Final Fantasy XI is right around the corner from its 20th anniversary. Let that sink in for a second. 20 years of an online MMO that have allowed players to explore the wonderful world of Vana'diel. It's kind of crazy to think it's been going on that long and is still successful and still charging a subscription that dumb people like me still pay for. No, it's awesome. But we were talking about it recently, and for most people that are still playing, I think there's a desire that it just keeps going on forever. I'm not saying everybody's 100% happy with how the game is now, or doesn't wish it was a little bit different, or maybe the ways that it used to be, but the chance for it to continue evolving and become or remain that perfect game is everybody's hope and dream, right? Obviously with, new content, continual improvements, balancing, but just forever, off into the distance. Something about that is incredibly appealing. And I think most modern MMOs are approaching, the concept of that forever game in a slightly different way, with a more seasonal approach. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I love that Yoshi P is like, go away, play other games. A lot of games are great. Then come back, take a break. It's okay. Final Fantasy XIV will be here when you get back. And I love that. But something about more modern structures and the concept of an end that you could get to and then walk away from has me struggling to stay engaged. Let's talk about it. So all this came about because we were talking about a couple things outside of gaming and Final Fantasy XI, different passions in my life that I've been excited about, especially in like kind of a lull period where we're waiting for the 20th anniversary of Final Fantasy XI, trying to see what that brings. But outside of that, kind of a weird point for MMOs. And there's two. One, I've been a huge part of weekly D&D sessions for a while now, actually like a few years, and I'm finally debating a fresh character. Don't tell my group. My DM knows, but I'm hoping nobody else is watching my Final Fantasy XI videos. Otherwise, it's cat's out of the bag. But yeah, my original character, the first time that we ever did D&D, he said, hey, building a character can be tough and intricate. Here's a page of like, a bunch of different classes and basic backgrounds. Feel free to just pick one and we'll see how long it goes. Well, I did. I picked a cleric dwarf named Harbeck, and I played him for 5 years, which isn't a bad way to approach it. I had a ton of fun. I love my cleric from a gameplay perspective. But then all of a sudden I realized I didn't understand anything about his motivations, his backgrounds, what things were driving him to do what. And I'm getting a little off topic here, but like essentially I realized that I was just playing like a blank slate. And although I could change it now, we could come up with a backstory. It feels weird after playing for like 4 or 5 years, just be like, no, all of that was because of a friendship he had that went real sour years ago. It's just too late. But in building this new character, I've been engrossed in the process in a way that I never thought I would be. Whenever I kind of looked at other classes, I'm like, I don't know, there's a lot, but like, I'll just kind of pick one and go through it. But no, I've been trying to flesh out every single aspect of this character's origin and background with the prospect of playing them for years to come. And this is where it kind of ties into what we were talking about with Final Fantasy XI and MMOs. Because there's no true end to D&D, you just keep going. The game continues to evolve around you and the players that you're playing with, either getting more difficult, more complex, more characters become interjoined and interact. It just goes. Because of that, this character choice can be incredibly important because it can continue to grow with the party or eventually, run out of reasons to continue, which is sort of what happened with my other character. It just doesn't really make sense for him to want to go on. But the session itself, the D&D group, the campaign, if you wanted to, can just continue to evolve and expand. I love that about it. It's one of my favorite things is that you can plan as much as you want, but long off in the future, the sessions, the D&D campaign that you're experiencing could be very different from the one you're experiencing today, and that could be good or bad. But you just kind of have to play out this character and build this character to the best of your ability to explore whatever that world is. And that planning for this long distant, never reachable endpoint, I love it. Similarly, I've been super swept up by the world of Warhammer 40k, which I'd never previously gotten into. I briefly looked at it back in middle school, but barely scratched the surface. And if you're wondering how all this connects back to the world of Final Fantasy XI and MMOs, I'm gonna get there. Just stick with me for just a sec. But with Warhammer 40k, diving in head first, I'm just blown away by the depth of the lore, the endless approaches to aesthetics, strategy, army building. Everything about this game is so customizable, unique, and expansive. You could spend years trying to understand every element of it, every facet, and still come up short. And then by then it'll probably have changed anyway, and you'll have to start all over again. But the reason that I'm attracted to it is surprisingly similar to why I love MMOs. It's a long-term investment that just continues to reward yourself the deeper you go. Which a lot of games, I don't feel like that's the case. It feels like there's a ton of fun and there's so much to engage in at like a shallow level. But if you just keep going deeper, eventually you realize that you're just kind of repeating yourself. But yeah, I've been sitting here, I'm like planning out future armies that I never will actually fully finish, probably playing out scenarios in my head that may or may not actually exist, like me going to an actual hobby store and playing a round of Warhammer 40k with somebody. Probably not something I'm gonna do. I'm terrified by that concept, but I love the idea. My army may be part of a larger lore that already exists that I'm trying to understand. I was looking at the Eldar, which is like our space elves in 40,000 years in the future, and they have this complex background. I'm reading books. I read like 3 full-fledged novels that kind of help me understand a little bit more about their background to see if it's something I'd like to play. Can you imagine if I was about to start Final Fantasy XI and I was like, the Tar. I've heard there are 9 or 10 novelizations that really expand upon their background. I'm kind of curious to read them before I think about playing that race. That's how I'm treating this. But on top of that, because Warhammer 40k is so big, it's not outside the realm of possibility that you are a faction or a custom version of a race or army that doesn't technically fully exist within the lore. Yes, it exists within the scope of the rule sets and all of that, but the background could be whatever you want. The universe is a big place. Anything could happen. But I'm utterly addicted to the process of choosing an aesthetic with the right lore. Because obviously the army itself, I'm going to spend a lot of time building this. It has to look good. But I'd like for the background to be something I'm also interested in. Like the various chaos factions look awesome. Kind of terrified by the fact that they're literally like, run by chaos gods. But there's a lot there. They are pretty cool. On top of that, there's actually playing the game. Once I build this army with the right lore, with the right aesthetics, with the cool background, does it play well? Or am I just like immediately like, I don't like how this faction plays at all. This was a terrible idea. Then there's even a time component. Some armies take longer to build than others because they are made up of smaller units or maybe more difficult to paint units. So getting from point A to point B, being totally done that army is literally a different amount of time depending on what you pick. This is sounding very familiar in your head, and let me know if it sounds familiar to you too. This is exactly what I used to think about when I was picking classes in Final Fantasy XI. I was like, all right, how hard is it to play? Does it look cool? Is there decent and interesting background with this class? How long is it going to take for me to level it? Is it going to be like Bard, where I go from 1 to 75 in like 2 seconds, but maybe the actual gameplay elements aren't that fun? Or is it going to be like Summoner, where I love the aesthetics and the gameplay, but 1 to 75 is going to take some time because nobody wants you in their party. This is all the stuff that my brain loves to do. I love diving into like when there's a million choices to build out the perfect character, or in this case, army. I love thinking through all those elements, even if at the end of the day, I don't actually get very far with it. Because how many times you've gone through all this thought process and then like you level with them for like 20 levels. You're like, never mind, wasn't for me. That's what I'm worried about with Warhammer. I'm worried I'm going to build like 10 units of something and be like, that was a terrible idea. I don't like this at all. Never going back. But the best part is bringing it all the way back around to why this all comes together with MMOs, Warhammer 40k, and for me, D&D. No matter how far I take any of these 3 things, that the investment will always be rewarded with tangible growth. Units that I can either use in my own army or as a friend's army when I want to try and make them play one day, and I just like hand them units that I'm not really excited about anymore. Pieces that I've put together and can be proud of. Warhammer 40k, it's literally tangible things. MMOs though, your character growth is measured in a tangible way with levels and skills and stats and gear and in-game money. When I play single player games, if I lose that save, or it's like a multiplayer game where it's tons of fun, like a Rainbow Six Siege or Call of Duty or something, tons of fun to play, but if I step away from a while, I will get rusty with those skills. But if I come back to a character in an MMO, that growth is still there and can never really be lost. And I love that about MMOs. And D&D, obviously, is just a character that, I maintain on a sheet, but that growth is still maintained over years, and I can bring it to each session. I love that feeling of progression. But that's what always draws me back to MMOs. This concept of growth will always be so valuable to me. But no matter how much growth you accomplish, it's never the last step. That's why MMOs are so great, because the game never truly ends. This was even more true with games that used horizontal progression back in the day. And I wouldn't even say that Final Fantasy XI still uses horizontal progression. The way that updates have been coming out, they're very vertical. The newer released equipment and content is just better in almost every way than the previously released stuff. I'm not to say the stuff that we had before was bad and not in some cases better piecemeal, but like there's a lot of amazing stuff that makes it hard to like look at a year ago and say like, no, that gear was way better. But back in the day, Final Fantasy XI was horizontal progression. EverQuest, horizontal progression. World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy XIV, more of a vertical style, but even there is that sense of I've made progress within this space, and if I come back and the new cap is a higher level, and all of a sudden there's more grinding I can do and more content that I didn't do and different gears that I can obtain, you still have built skills and knowledge about that game for years and years and years, and that can be applied along with the growth that your character made, that even if it's not the max anymore, is still valuable. But that's why that model has been so successful for so long. Even in the vertical progression, the seasonal model that so many MMOs and even like what do you call like in Destiny, like a lobby-based online game? I don't know, something like that. The reason those are so popular is that people love that feeling of returning to a comfortable space, a game that they're really familiar with and can just jump into and feel strong and powerful and like they've been playing it for years, because they have been. And with all those years of skill and knowledge, use that to progress to the next stage in this game. I love that. With Square Enix finally putting some financial stability and focus on one of their longest running games of all time, Final Fantasy XI, it shows that at least at some level, Square Enix is starting to recognize the deep levels of passion that their players have about their online games. And if you just kind of leave them out there to rot, not only is it a waste, it's a waste of an amazing game with an amazing community and literally a huge source of income with the amount of subscribed players that are still playing it. But it's a waste of the chance of seeing where that game could go in the future. The style of the never-ending game, the game that they just continue to support and update for years and years and years, has merit, and players appreciate it when your game has a solid core that is enjoyable to play. But I think we're rounding the corner of developers realizing that these long-term, never-ending games have merit, both financially and is just an amazing game that players love to return to. So whether it comes through continued updates to Final Fantasy XI, I can't wait to see what the 20th anniversary brings for us. Changes and growth in Final Fantasy XIV, or the next game on the horizon like Pantheon Rise of the Fallen or Ashes of Creation. I'm just excited to see what comes next. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. Is this kind of concept something that you appreciate, or do you wish your MMOs were scaled back a little bit so there was an end goal that you could reach? For me, to kind of summarize all this, not having that final top makes me feel like everything else is just experiencing a game and not completing it. But I like that. How do you feel? Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I'll see you guys all in the next one. Have a good one. Peace. Not gonna lie, I've been super eager for something new lately. Like, it's funny because, you know, we're approaching the 20th anniversary and I'm excited to see what they do for 11, but I also just like really am looking out for a like new. You know, this said 25 was like still a decent time to do this, but I guess it's because these bugles are tough and it would have been too early otherwise.